All right. Beautiful First Nation people. We hope everyone had a good lunch. We want to welcome everybody back to the second half of our conference, and of course, day 2 of our conference. Yeah, we know that the lights are kind of bright, but at the same time, you know, my family and friends, we're very honored to be here at this time. We're very honored to have the opportunity to engage in conversation with our respected guests. And we want to just kindly acknowledge them in a respectable way. Our next speakers, we want to respectfully invite to the front these 2 beautiful women that you see situated at the very front here, 2 Cree women who are trained social workers and have years of experience working within First Nation communities in various capacities. Amber and Terry. And they currently work at MacEwan University and are the creators of 2 Crees in a Pod, a podcast that amplifies Indigenous voices to honor Indigenous helping practices. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome them to this beautiful day. And of course, in moving forward, as we all know, we are certainly in the presence of one of our respected leadership representatives here in the city of Edmonton, joining their podcast, His Worship Mayor Amarjeet Sohi, Mayor of Edmonton. Yep, that's right. My family and friends, Mayor Sohi was elected a member of Parliament for Edmonton Millwoods in 2015. 3 years later, he was named Minister of Natural Resources. In 2021, he was sworn in as the 36th Mayor of Edmonton. Mayor Amarjeet Sohi is the first visible minority to serve as mayor for our city. So my family and friends, very grateful to have these beautiful people with us here today, and we're going to hand it over to them for this wonderful conversation and this beautiful podcast. So we'll hand it over to the beautiful Cree women and, of course, our wonderful Mayor Amarjeet Sohi. Welcome.
Not as beautiful.
Gorgeous,
No.
handsome,
No.
stunning.
He wants to sit right between us.
Yeah.
But we need some distance.
Stop here. Stop.
Sitting on your lap. Welcome, everyone. My name is Terry Cardinal. I am from Sad Lake First Nation in Treaty 6 territory. And we are extremely excited to have Mayor Sohi here with us. I was telling Amber, I said, this is Uncle Sohi. We're going to call you Uncle.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
But with that, with Uncle, there's some responsibilities. Some responsibilities to being an uncle.
Yeah.
And one of them is that, if there's any men bothering Amber or, bothering us, that you have a responsibility to have our back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I feel like I'm at home.
So thank you for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Amber, and we're going to get right into the questions.
Awesome. Tanse, I pigasis nitigas and kinakoma sekotinia. My name is Amber Dion, and I'm from the Keynote Cree Nation here in Treaty 6 territory. And my current role is that I'm an assistant professor with MacEwan University School of Social Work, and of course, the co-host of 2 Crees in a Pod. And so we are really thankful to be here. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us. Thank you to all of y'all who have been doing such good work over the last 2 days. We really appreciate you. And thank you for inviting us along with Mayor Sohi as well.
Uncle Sohi.
Sorry.
Uncle.
Okay.
What are you forgetting?
We went there, so we're gonna stay there. That was quick. Thank you, Uncle. And so one of the things that we would like to do first is allow you to introduce yourself in whichever way you would like to in your role as Uncle. Yeah. And so we want to give you that space. Along with your introduction, our first question or our first thought is around thinking about reconciliation as something that's very complex. It's a very complex process in this country. And so our first question is kind of to understand when you think of reconciliation, what are the things that come to your mind along with your introduction?
Yeah. No, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I do want to start acknowledging that this is Treaty 6 land, and we are all treaty people, and this realization was not always on top of my mind when I got here, because I had very little understanding of the rich history of indigenous peoples of this land. And then later on, as I became more and more aware of the history and start connecting the history of colonization of Canada with the history of colonization of India, where I was born in. And so for me, when I think about reconciliation, when I think about land acknowledgement, for me it's it has a much deeper meaning than just a superficial acknowledgement. A number of reasons. One is that shared history. And the second is that, I came to this city with nothing. I couldn't speak the language. I struggled a lot. I faced a lot of racism and discrimination when I was in school or at work. But this community lifted me up. There's something in this place that welcomes a stranger and then allow that stranger to be part of the community and lift that stranger up in a way that they're successful. And I have a deepest appreciation for that. And so on reconciliation, I think the way our society works, the dominant culture teaches you a lot of biases toward other communities, other cultures, and other peoples. And when I got here, I was never taught anything about indigenous histories and the colonization of Canada, residential schools, and 60s scoop, all the things that I learned later on. What I was taught about indigenous peoples by the mainstream media was all these biases that people think about. So I had to do a lot of unlearning of all these things that subconsciously I learned, right? And so that has part my personal journey of reconciliation and making myself more aware, and also relating my realities with the realities of many challenges that indigenous friends and colleagues of mine that came to know faced. I think when I look back at the racism I faced, then I can relate that to racism faced by other people, and then we become allies. As we become allies, actually we get to know each other, and we become more attuned to each other's realities. So that's how I'm growing and doing my part. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
And let me know if I'm taking too long and giving too long answers, then I'll cut them short. So as my niece would tell me.
We'll go like this.
Yes, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, that's
It's enough now.
Yeah.
And just to those who are joining us virtually, if there is questions that you have, just put them in the question voting, and we will be taking questions throughout as well. So my question, Uncle, is in relation to what is your story and what brought you to politics? I think that many of us do what we do for experiences or reasons within our life, and so I pose that question to you. What brought you to politics?
Yeah, I never thought about ever running for office because when you are resettling in a new place, your focus is, settling your life and finding a job, and then finding a decent place to live, and you're in that daily struggles. But I think those daily struggles are the reasons that I'm in politics, because my experiences led me to become part of a broader community activists group, where we talked about solidarity, where we talked about what was going on in the world, where we talked about our own experiences of, and then with the place where I was working, talk about institutionalized racism. I was working for the city in a department where we were forced to work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, without any overtime, without any sick leave, without any benefits, and we were predominantly an immigrant workforce.
Yeah.
And so, because I was involved in the community, I was playing some leadership role in other areas. My colleagues looked up to me to actually organize them into asking for better conditions. So I took on that role. Took us 3 or 4 years to organize. We became part of the union. We won our first collective agreement. We took the city to court, won that challenge. And that allowed me to interact with some city councilors because we were advocating for ourselves. And during that, I really learned that working class people, our lives are actually impacted each and every day by the decisions that politicians make, right? And that made me curious about, we need to think about our role. We need to think about why we need to be in those positions of power and authority and make decisions that benefit average person. So that led me to run first time in 2004 for city council, which I lost big time, big time. I finished fourth, distant fourth, not even close fourth. And it was devastating. So my wife and I, we just went into our basement for a few days, didn't come out at all, right? Then friends started coming and they encouraging us, and then we, rolled up our sleeves and decided that, 3 years from now we can do it again. And then we did it again in 2007, and I won that election and never looked back from that day to today. It is rewarding, absolutely. I think we're doing some good work. I have always rooted myself in community. I always think about, my life as an immigrant, my life as a worker, my life as a taxi driver, my life as a taxi driver, my life as a transit operator. And I think about those people when I'm making decisions, okay, how the steps we can take, how we make average people, ordinary people's life better.
Right. Nice. And you used the word solidarity, and one of the things that I often think about is how we find solidarity in our collective suffering, and we also find solidarity in our collective resilience as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important that you brought up solidarity. And in saying that, our next question is about some of the current initiatives that this city is taking, in the calls to, the TRC calls to action.
Yeah.
And what are some examples of initiatives that are currently happening? And I think our other question in relation to that is, are they led by Indigenous peoples? And if they're not, then how are they being supported?
Yeah. I'll start with housing first. When we talk about reconciliation, I don't think true reconciliation cannot be achieved until we tackle issues of houselessness, mental health, addictions, poverty. Because when I look at Edmonton and the people who are experiencing houselessness, 60% do come from Indigenous communities. So without having a proper place to call home, where people can heal, get better, we cannot achieve true reconciliation. So one thing that I've been pushing hard since being elected is that we need to have wherever we need shelters, they should be led by Indigenous peoples. We need to have more supportive housing led by Indigenous peoples, run by Indigenous people with appropriate cultural services. We don't have that yet. There's only one organization that is providing supportive housing, Niginan. Some of you, I'm sure you're familiar with, a wonderful organization. They're doing some great work, but there's only one organization. Yeah. We should be encouraging more. So that's one that I am absolutely committed to doing and following up. The other one is the anti-racism work that we're doing. We have an anti-racism advisory committee. On that, there are members from Indigenous communities who are on that, so which is very good, and that's being informed by the lived experience, the work that we're doing, and we'll have a report coming up to us in a couple of weeks about Edmonton's strategy on anti-racism work. And the third one is economic development. There are, people like me who came here were never told that there were very thriving economies before colonization. People were doing really well, and the societies were thriving. But then, throughout centuries of oppression, those economies were destroyed.
Right.
And then how we rebuild that, how we build the capacity of Indigenous communities to take on the opportunities that exist. Again, there's a lot of gaps there.
Right.
Okay, and we need to fill those gaps. Then the Indigenous framework that city is committed to doing. I know Louis is here. There's some other leaders here who have been part of establishing that framework. It was co-developed, which is nice. That's how we need to do it. So there are a lot of gaps that we need to fill. I don't think I'll be. I think I will not be frank with you if I say that all those initiatives are being led by Indigenous communities. They are not. They're still being led by non-Indigenous communities leaders. I'm not saying that those people are not, their hearts are not in the right place. They are, right? Mm-hmm. But their lived experience is different.
Right.
And these initiatives should be led by Indigenous communities more.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that, one of the things that I'll add in regards to the Indigenous award naming that took place, the city of Edmonton, I was very fortunate to be a part of as one of the circle keepers, and was invited by the city to embark on that process. And it was a new process. And one of the things that we did was invite our Indigenous leaders, our women, our leaders, our scholars to the table, and engaged in ceremony and had a lot of conversations about what this may look like. And that process was a very beautiful, meaningful process. And it was because the city trusted us to do that work and lead that work and the way that we needed to do that. And because of that, and I think one of the other beautiful things, I was telling Amber about this, was that the Edmonton Naming Committee was a part of that process as well. And they were able to sit in and listen to us and witness the way in which we did this process over 2 months and learn from that. And I think that, it was the first time that we had really done anything. And I think even in this country that something like that has been done. But just how beautiful it was for all these people to come together and gift these names over to the city of Edmonton in ceremony as a gift. And when I think about an initiative on reconciliation, definitely that was something. And now, today we have our 12 ward boundary names that are all Indigenous names in the city, representing different nations. And that was done when we were told, initially that it was impossible. This can't be done, and it's impossible to get this done and to do that much consultation, but we know in the way in which we do things within Indigenous governance, within ceremony, within our ways of knowing, being, and doing, and with the guidance of our elders, that we can get it done.
Mm-hmm. And Indigenous women can get anything done.
Absolutely. And that's a good example. And, Edmontonians have embraced those names, and I think it's a good way to engage with the history and the culture and learn more about it. So I absolutely, I don't know if you know this or not. When I was a Minister of Natural Resources, I was assigned one of the most difficult, controversial undertaking, which was to fix the broken process of consultation on pipelines related to Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project. Earlier on in the process, I met with my staff, saying, look, Indigenous communities took us to the court, right? We lost. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, whenever Indigenous communities take Government of Canada to court, government loses, why don't we learn from that, right? Why don't we start doing things differently? And one of the things that I asked our administration to do is that if we were going to re-engage with indigenous communities on consultation, but why don't we actually ask them how they would like to be engaged instead of us going in saying, this is the framework to engage, right? And I think that during that conversation, I was really reminded by a number of leaders that we talk about indigenous issues, that we need to prescribe to this thinking and philosophy, which is that nothing for us without us, right? And I follow that principle. I'll try to follow that principle in my work. That is why even during the campaign, whenever we developed indigenous-related policy or program that we would talk about in the campaign, we always relied on the wisdom and guidance of indigenous leaders that I surrounded myself with during the campaign. And that helped me actually as a person to grow and learn more, but it also helped us develop better policy.
Right. And so in spirit of the conference itself, and the conference being an educators conference, and as an educator, I think a lot about how our education needs to involve, or education and social justice or social activism need to be best friends. They need to be incorporated with one another. And so I want to hear your thoughts around social justice, social activism in relation to politics, and how those two things are also best friends, and what you do in your leadership position, how you would consider yourself involved in social activism or social justice.
Yeah. So I think the role of governance, role of politics is to make your community better. And that's exactly what the role of social justice is, to make your community better and look at the inequities that exist and how we close that gap and deal with those inequities. And those inequities do exist in every aspect of our society, from economy to well-being to in housing to access to employment and opportunities. And all those. I think there's a lot of alliance that what activists want to do and what progressive governments can do.
Right.
Right? And that's how I look at it, particularly at a local level. Because at a local level, you're not bound by a particular ideology or a party platform or party discipline. Here, you can actually go into the community, learn new ideas, bring those ideas back to city council, and then start talking about them, how you can implement them. I think that's why. Another thing I think is the ongoing engagement.
Right.
Having a formalized way for community to feed into council decision making, the things that the community wants done. I think that's another way to interact with people who are working in the social justice area and people who are out activists out there. Right? On education, and I wish that we were teaching our kids more about indigenous cultures and history. We still don't do that.
Yes.
Even though we have come quite far away from when I got here and when I went to school. Even now, interestingly, when I was sworn in, my nephews, two lovely daughters, one is 8 and one is 6, and they live in Calgary, and they came to the swear-in ceremony. And when I spoke in my inaugural speech, I talked about reconciliation. I talked about partnership with indigenous communities. And I use the word communities, not community. Communities, recognizing that polarity. So my niece asked me this, she calls me, actually, this is interesting, you call me uncle, and she calls me, when I was a minister, she used to call me Minister Dad, right? Which is Minister Grandpa, right? Yeah, right? Now she calls me Minister, Dadu Mayor, right? Yeah. So she goes, Dadu, why communities
Yeah.
instead of community, right? I think that was intrigued. I was really intrigued that when we actually talk about the people, kids pay attention and they learn. And we need to do more of that. Right? In schools, in our conversations and everything that we do.
I just wanted to add something.
Yeah.
I think that, one of the things, and you talked about the importance of education.
Yeah.
And I think that, I remember when initially when the graves were found in BC last May, and that was announced, I remember sitting with my father, who is a residential school survivor. And I remember sitting with him, and I actually went out to Blue Quills, and they were having a ceremonial fire out there, and I went sit with the president there one night. And I called my dad, and I wanted to have a conversation, because I knew at that time many Indigenous people, whether they're survivors or their families, were feeling a lot of that pain during that time. And I asked my dad, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? If you think about what would you like to see as a change? And he said to educate, that we need to, not just within our own schools, within our communities, but non-Indigenous people need to learn about us too. They need to learn about our history. They need to learn about our culture, and understand us, because there's such, again, that the stereotypes and the biases that are out there about Indigenous people, and we're not really teaching about, the beautifulness of our culture and how complex it is as well. And so I totally support that I think that there is many of our schools and our post-secondaries, K-12, and need to look at developing more curriculum to teach our young folks.
I'll just add something really quickly. And as an educator of adults in post-secondary, one of the things that I see often is we have adult learners coming into our institutions, and they're hearing about some of these things for the very first time, especially from a visibly Indigenous person. And so I think that, again, one of the questions I ask my students often is, what has your experiences been with Indigenous peoples? And they're predominantly professional relationships, right? Well, I worked with Indigenous people. Yeah. But having, some relationship outside of that is pretty rare. And so I really like to, and thank you for saying that, Terry, and thank you, Uncle Sohi, for that as well, is one of the things I really strongly believe is that if we are only ever teaching our kids or our adults about Indigenous peoples through the lens of colonization, then that's what they're gonna learn. Yeah. And it only validates our existence in the lens of colonization. Yeah. And we were here far before any European settlers stepped foot into this territory. And so I think that it's really important for us to, again, teach our young people about how beautiful we are. We're deadly. We're wicked people. We are. We're fun. We're
bossy.
We're bossy. and we're incredible human beings.
Yes.
And so I think that that's something that I think that a message to educators is to ensure that we are teaching our young people and our adults about all of our resilience and all of our beauty. And not only to validate our existence through that lens of our pain and our trauma, because that's often when we start learning about Indigenous people is through settlement, rather than learning about us who we were pre-settlement.
Through resiliency, through the history and the richness of that. We don't, absolutely, we don't teach that.
Right.
And we need to do more of that. And I had a brief stint at McCune University as well, teaching a course on leadership and anti-racism and capacity building. I did 2 sessions, and the way I designed that course was exactly, it wasn't really a curriculum-based course, more about let's come together, sit on the table, and talk about our shared history, shared values, and really reflect on who we are. And as leaders, it was all tailored to our leaders. And as leaders, are we really building anti-racist organizations? And if we ourselves as leaders don't have the tools to be anti-racist ourselves, then how do we expect actually to build anti-racist organizations?
Right.
It was quite an enriching experience, and a lot of us actually opened up to each other to talk about our own flaws, our own shortcomings, and how we need to find different tools to tackle these kind of societal issues. So absolutely, that's one example I'm sharing. I think there's much bigger role of education
Right.
in that.
Yeah.
So I actually just want to check with our moderator and just see if there is any questions that are coming in that we may want to address.
Hi. Yeah, there's a question on here. What are your thoughts with the new Alberta curriculum that is being forced or rolled out? The lack in so many ways, but especially with any true history about First Nation and Indigenous people. I know this is a provincial issue, but is there anything you can do at the municipal level?
This has been absolutely one of the most controversial things that this government has undertaken, and opposition has come to this implementation of this curriculum from every sector of society, from educators, from Indigenous leaders, from cultural leaders, from teachers, from parents, and I just don't understand that why. I know they backed off a bit now, right? I think they're probably looking for a way to be out of it, right? So, but I hear you. I think the role that we can play is engage our own communities that we represent on these societal bigger issues, on why education is not just about technical skills that you learn. Education is actually about developing human potential.
Right.
It is about the holistic growth of the person that is not possible if you just focus on just select segment of your history instead of teaching them. Or actually, I think when we teach kids about what has gone wrong in the society, I think we actually build a resiliency to respond better in the future about some of the things that could potentially go wrong. So it's not in my view. I don't think this whole notion of that some of these histories are not age appropriate for people to learn. I think that is probably in my mind, as in my experience, not the case.
Yeah. Is there any other questions?
Yes, there's tons.
Oh,
There you go.
well, we're keeping you here till 10 o'clock tonight, Mayor.
You're not allowed. Lock the doors.
Lock the doors.
All right. I'm
How
home, so I'm not leaving.
How important do you think the Kichiaski Sacred Land Project is to the city of Edmonton?
Oh, absolutely. I know Louis is here. He's been working on that. I'm actually, we are putting forward, our budget request to the federal government for funding for that project, as well as other Indigenous-led projects. Absolutely critical. We need to get it done faster. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we want to take one more question for now, and then we'll go back to some of the other stuff that we have?
Sure. Edmonton plays host to several large Indigenous events that generate significant revenue for the city of Edmonton, most of which are annual events that bring in nations together from Treaty 6, 7, and 8. As mayor, how will you support these events like the Alberta Indigenous Games and Alberta Native Hockey Provincials that are so important for our youth?
Oh, wow. Honestly, some of that stuff I didn't know. Let's find ways to work together and find ways to support. One thing that I talked about during my campaign our downtown is really struggling now because of people are not going to work downtown, business are closed, because a lot of business are people-oriented services. And one thing that we talked about as part of the recovery is that we actually need to encourage more multicultural festivals as well as more indigenous cultural festivals, right? I think this is a great opportunity. So we will definitely follow up. If you could send us some of the, or maybe folks in this room know some of the folks, we'd love to catch up with them and learn more about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's next on our list there, Auntie Terry?
I think
If you
that-
call Terry auntie, I look like a grandpa.
Mosum Sohi.
names changing as we move through the.
You'll leave here with 4 names.
I think that one of the, I appreciate what you said about in education, and we go into education to learn to essentially be better human beings. And I think about, and I always relate that to Indigenous education, and I relate that to our ceremonies. And when we go into our lodges, what we're taught and what we listen to, and as we watch and we witness that happening, and our natural laws that are implemented in those spaces teach us from when we're small to be good human beings.
Oh,
and it's our, and I always say those are our schools, right? They teach us to be. They create a connection for us, first of all, but they definitely teach us to be good human beings in this world. And so I really appreciate that comment. One of the things that I have a question about is in regards to racism. And I think that, in my work at MacEwan, I've been working with MacEwan University as the Director of Indigenous Initiatives for the last 5 years. And my background is in social work as well, my education. But also understanding, we've done a lot of initiatives around the TRC, the calls to action at the university, but one of the things that is just, it's always ongoing is the racism, right? Whether that is racism in the institution, and well, I just want to know what your thoughts are in regards to that. And I know the city they do have an anti-racism committee. So I'm just wondering kind of what is the lead of the city's taking?
Yeah. So I am so proud that I brought forward, right on the inauguration day when we were sworn in, I brought forward a motion for our council to consider, which was giving direction to our administration to develop anti-racism strategy for Edmonton. So that was unanimously passed. Then we recently allocated $1.14 million that will go toward community organizations that are actually doing anti-racism work. Then we have a strategy coming up for discussion at council that will actually look at what that comprehensive anti-racism strategy look like. I think Edmonton is positioned to be truly an anti-racist city. I believe that. And what I mean by anti-racist city is a city that is willing to question each and every day our biases toward each other, each and every day questioning our institutions, how they were structured, and are they actually responding to today's realities and changing as the times change, and how we look at reconciliation and the commitments to Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations, or the recommendations coming out of the murdered Indigenous women and girls in inquiry, or how do we look at economic opportunities? Are we actually, or inequities? Not everybody's at the same level, and not every group is the same level. How you actually bring everyone up to the level that from there you can talk about equality. Right? So I think I am very excited about it, but it's not going to be easy work, and it's not going to be just one generation work. This is going to be multi-generational work. So I'm really excited about that.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I like that you just brought up the generational work, because one of the things that we heard, and I was just listening to one of our podcast episodes with Dr. Sherry Chizin, And she talked about reconciliation, and she compared it to, looking at discrepancies on different sides of a ledger from a banking point of view. And she used that metaphor to describe how we reconcile. And she talked about how on two different sides of the ledger, if we look at where the error was made, the error wasn't made on our side of the ledger.
No.
And then that's where the work needs to be invested. And so I really appreciate Sherry's metaphor and the way that she interpreted that. And I also think the other important piece in relation to that, to generational work, is that we have inherited a lot of responsibility. And so, Terry and I talk about this with our fathers being Indian residential school survivors and the responsibility that her and I have inherited and the work that we do because of that inheritance. And I think that that's a good question for leadership, educators, settler folks here in this city, is thinking about what is the responsibility you have inherited from your ancestors, and looking at what side of the ledger you're on, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's an important thing to talk about, is around responsibility, and that is about generational responsibility.
Yeah. And the burden that you are forced to carry, right? Even when you're changing the society, like first society victimizes you, your or your family, and your parents, grandparents lived through that. Then it's also a burden on you now to actually not to just explain that history, but also the burden of changing that. Right? So it's a double burden. It's not an easy task, but I think people like you and I and people in this room, we don't have a choice.
Right.
Like if we don't push for change, nobody else is going to push that for us, right? So it's hard. It is traumatizing sometimes. It brings back that pain that we live through, because I am also a survivor of oppression, right? So whenever I talk about social justice, when I talk about reconciling with my past, it always brings those memories back, right? So it's not easy work. So but the way I look at it, that we may feel down sometimes, right? We may feel, why are we burdened with this? But I don't see any other way. We don't have a choice. We have to fight it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So who are we gonna fight?
Wants to fight.
Want to fight. Is there another question? I'm conscious of time, and I know that Uncle, I was gonna call you Mayor again, that Uncle Sohi has to leave at 2:30, and so I just want to be conscious of time. And so if there's other questions that we can pose to the Mayor?
Sure, there's one on here. There are many motivated Indigenous youth experiencing a difficult time finding employment in the city. This may be due to stigma and racism. How is the City of Edmonton trying to break down barriers so they can be an active part of the workforce?
Yes. So one of the things that I committed to doing as a mayor is that our workforce must reflect the diversity of our city, right? Unfortunately, at this time, it does not. Even in senior level of administration, mid-level, it does not really, truly be the mirror that it needs to be. So one thing that I'm going to explore with our city manager is a mentorship program. We should be actually mentoring young leaders so they can take on those responsibilities. Those young leaders, either they come from Indigenous communities or other I don't want to use the word marginalized. I think it's more, language matters too. We need to start actually figuring out better way of talking about communities that have been left behind, deliberately haven't.
Yes.
I would say equity-seeking groups. Equity-seeking groups and members of those communities needs to be mentored and provided opportunities. So this is something that I absolutely going to explore.
So I noticed something on the table here.
A proclamation. It is a proclamation from
Do you want to talk about that?
What is that?
Here
What are you
is-
giving us?
Okay.
Is that
so maybe
$5 million?
Maybe I'll do this first, right? So, okay, I'm going to change some language on this now that we. Okay.
Never mind, I'm gonna rewrite it.
All right. Proclamation.
Let's rewrite it right now.
There you go. Whereas Indigenous history is rich with unique cultural practices that are woven into the fabric of our city. And whereas by educating ourselves on Indigenous heritage, we honor their ancestors' way of knowing and better understanding our differences. And whereas the Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center promotes the value of learning about Indigenous customs through celebrating and sustaining culture and identity. And whereas City of Edmonton is committed to reconciling our difficult history by learning from the Indigenous communities and working together to create a more inclusive city. Therefore, I, Uncle Amarjeet Sohi, do hereby proclaim February 3rd, 2022, First Nations Education Day in Edmonton, Alberta's capital city. How is that?
Someone has to make him a uncle medallion.
Yeah,
Real big too.
yeah. Go talk to Conway Kootenai. He'll teach you all the ways.
Well, we can't get him an Alka medallion, but I do have a nice appreciation of welcoming him here and thanking him for coming into the podcast with Two Crees in the Pod.
Yes.
With Amber and Terry. And on behalf of the conference committee and organizing committee and Big Stone Education Authority.
Oh, thank you.
Give you this blanket. You could open it up yourself. It's really nice. That way I don't have to touch it and, you know.
Hey, you can make a really nice jacket.
Yes.
Or your wife.
Oh, that's a big.
Oh, beautiful.
It's a buffalo. You gotta dance around. You gotta put that around you. Wrap
Yeah.
yourself up.
Here, I'll sing you a song. Hold on. Wow, that is beautiful. Yes, hold the proclamation.
There we go. I asked my two nieces to join us,
Yeah, come on.
Amber and Terry.
Oh! I'm looking around. I'm like, where?
Come on, cousin.
Where are they? I looked back thinking you had nieces here. Here we are.
So nice of you for this.
I got it. You didn't get it.
I didn't get it. I looked
got up
back.
right away.
I looked back. I said, where? Where are the nieces? So again, thank you so much for being part of this incredible conversation with us.
Thank you.
We are very thankful. And we look forward to seeing all the incredible things that you and your other co-leaders will do in the future for our city.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone for listening. And I look forward to doing more of these, and look forward to actually probably visiting you sometime.
Yes.
At McCune University.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank
right.
you.
That was good.
Yeah. You didn't even need your notes.
That's a beautiful blanket.
That is a beautiful blanket.
What is after this, actually?
All right, my family and friends, I think they deserve another nice round of applause. What do you say, ladies and gentlemen? What a beautiful, beautiful podcast, wonderful conversation. Mayor, we thank you so much for your attendance here today and also sharing your views on First Nation people and reconciliation and treaties. And by listening to you today, we now have a very good understanding that your heart is in the right place for First Nations people, and that really encourages us and inspires us to continue to move forward in a good way. So again, thank you so much for your attendance, and we really appreciate you being with us here for day 2 of our conference. Let's give him one more round of applause before he departs. We know that he has a very busy schedule. Thank you so much once again. All right, beautiful Cree women, the newly adopted nieces of our mayor of Edmonton. Yeah, you guys did a wonderful job, these 2 ladies here. Thank you so much for, engaging in conversation with our mayor. And I don't think there's any more questions that we want to address and bring forward. And if that's the case, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can once again give our ladies one more final thank you and show them our appreciation. One more round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Terry and Amber. Keep up the great work. Keep up the great work in representing our First Nation people. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi.
In some ways, it's an historic day today with this proclamation. That means so much to us, especially when it's delivered and represented and signed by our mayor of Edmonton. So thank you so much for that. And we know that we do have somewhat of a timeline that we're trying to acknowledge and stay with, because we do have people on the outside that are taking in this conference virtually, sitting in front of their screens, their laptops, and they do have agendas of their own. And we know that we did end a little bit early. It's close to 2:30 right now, and we are expected to move forward into our next agenda item, which is, of course, going to be none other than our good brother. We're going to call him up in a little bit. So with the direction from our organizers, do we want to take a little bit of a break prior to moving forward? Okay, one of the things that we like to do when we acknowledge our First Nation brothers and sisters is introduce them right before they come up. And then that way we give them a respectable, honorable introduction. So we're going to acknowledge and invite everyone to take a short break. We're going to invite everybody back here about at 3 o'clock. That's in about a half hour. So enjoy this half hour before our last presenter, before our last guest, our last friend that's going to come up here. So in about a half hour, we're going to reconvene and invite everybody back here. And we'll introduce in a respectable way our next guest. Enjoy your break, everybody. Thank you.
Mr. Shibo,